So then, a distinctive phase in the standardization of Bengali prose writing began with the founding of two institutions in 1800, the Baptist Mission Press and the Fort William College in Calcutta. William Carey, as founding father of the mission and the principal architect of the college's Bengali department, had connections with both. With the establishment of the vernacular press at Serampore from 1800 onwards, which you will remember is the first Bengali printing press set up in the region, had connections with the establishment of pioneering vernacular press at Serampore from 1800 onwards, a series of printed works in the vernacular began to be produced which had an important bearing on the Bengali language. While most of these publications were tracts and pamphlets meant for proselytization, as I've said, the Serampore Press was also the supplier of textbooks, readers, grammars and dictionaries to the Fort William College and other educational institutions. The Calcutta School Book Society, and again the Calcutta School Book Society is a very important body during this period for the circulation of educational literature, also had its publications issuing from the Mission Press. So the conjunction of the need for textbooks for the college and the availability of a printing press at Serampore thus provided the perfect opportunity for the setting of literary standards in Bengali print for the first time. So this is where the institutional dimension kicks in. We have to understand how this was part of a larger process and not just isolated efforts of a few scholars here and there, but this is where the institutional machinery is at work. And just a little detail of information here. We know how the Pundits were important. So it wasn't just Mrityunjay Vidyalanka, but a whole team of Pundits were helping these scholars to standardize Bengali during this period. And to understand how important these Pundits were, I've looked into their records, and it's not surprising to know that one of the biggest items of expenditure for the Baptist mission at Serampore was the paying of the monthly wages of these Pundits. And these poor missionaries, obviously they couldn't afford that much money, and they had to constantly write back to their parent missions back in England saying, we want more money. But a lot of this money was actually being channelized towards the payment of these Pundits, who were very, very expensive, I can tell you. But this language, what they fail to realize is, and it's ridiculous, and it can be the subject of another paper, but this Bengali was just so ridiculous that nobody could actually understand them. This was highly sonorous, artificial Bengali, which completely defeated the purpose because ordinary people couldn't understand that language. And it came to be known as Shahebi Bangla, it came to be ridiculed as Shahebi Bangla. So this is not the Bangla we understand, but this is the Bangla of the Shahebs, of the white man writing this language, which we completely don't understand. And I've published elsewhere, and not in this book, but a very interesting article about how the missionaries were extremely happy that people were taking away their tracts, because wherever they went with their tracts, everyone got them. But they took away their tracts, fine, but it wasn't actually for reading them. And they would turn up at times, in completely different contexts. They were used as wrapping paper in shops. They were used for flying kites. They were used for all kinds of purposes, but for reading. And these poor missionaries don't understand. And they write back, glorifying to the parent societies, glorifying how their activities, and saying how well they were doing and how well they were spreading the word. And they say, but we don't understand. And they were very honest about it, because I found this in Baptist missionary records, not from anywhere else. So they were very honest about it. They do say that this is actually what we found was actually happening. And that's absolutely amazing, because they think, that's an aberration. But if you look at the circulation figures, and you look at other accounts, because you can corroborate this from other sources as well, a lot of this was being spent in this way. So, paper was a very valuable commodity for all other kinds of purposes, not just for reading. So clearly then, this Bengali wasn't working. It wasn't working at all. Certainly not for proselytization. But to give you some facts and figures again, very interesting that the Bengali that was being promoted within the school book societies and within the educational field in Bengal actually becomes the standard for Bengali in the region. And between Many of these were actually translated into Hindi and Oriya for use in schools in Bihar and Orissa, so that the Bengali books could be seen to be guiding public education in these two states. Over a vast region then, actually the matter, the material that was being published and printed from the mission press was having a greater influence in the region. Just some few facts and figures. Between 1832 and 36, just 4 years, the distribution figures for the school book societies books jumped from 52,243 to 123,844. So that's about from roughly 52,000 to 123,000, and that's just within a period of 4 years. So there's a massive body of this literature that is being produced. I have other figures, but I shan't go into it, but they're all very telling. You just know that a great body of educational literature is being produced. By 1860s, a standard Bengali purged of its syncretic associations, so you know how the language was actually evolving in its natural state before all this interference came in, and modeled strictly on Sanskrit, had established itself under the joint supervision of the colonial state and powerful indigenous groups. Polite Bengali had essentially come into existence to serve the needs of this group, and this is what I argue in my bigger work, which is about how this is actually a process of social engineering. So it's groups who are close to the colonial state, groups who are in power, have a say in the shaping of language. So this is not, you know, it's not unique to the project of Bengali. This is true all over the world. Those with power and dominant groups have a greater say in the shaping of a standardized language, which then, you know, basically comes to dominate the print scene. But these groups have quite a big role to play, and this kind of social engineering is something that we have to look out for and understand, and not take literary tastes as sacrosanct, because you know these literary tastes are actually created, languages are shaped. These are artificial processes, they don't just happen. So linguistically and socially, therefore, this new Bengali that is being created sought to establish its domination over other variants of the language and the social groups that they represented. And as I've said in my work, I've looked at Meli Bhasha. These are the strands that got, you know, basically marginalized. Meli Bhasha, the colloquial, and Musalmani Bengali. Let's now then turn to Musalmani Bengali and the fate of Musalmani Bengali and what happened to it. And you know, let's trace the fortunes of that language. Sorry, this should have come earlier, but you know, basically I've talked you through this. These are the various institutions that had been at the center of the printing and educational project of the early 19th century. But let's look at the rise of Islamic Bengali, variously also known as Musalmani Bengali, from the mid-19th century onwards. And Shukumar Sen, who's a very important scholar of the Bengali language, says that this was a creation of the 19th century. And he sees this as a mixed lexicon of Persian and Arabic, together with some other words of non-indigenous origin, like Portuguese. And in poetic compositions of the times, this was also known as Dohashi literature, which is literally two languages. Literary historians trace the origins of Muslim Bengali to the second half of the 19th century. In fact, the first time this term was coined, was in 1855 by James Long, the Reverend James Long, who we briefly met earlier, who, after Carey, is the second most important person within this linguistic project. And he calls it Musalman Bengali. And remember, he's the guy who said that this is the language of the boatmen, and so on. So most hold that the term cannot be used to describe the Bengali of the late Mughal and even the early British period. Shukumar Sen believes that this was a creation of the 19th century, as I have said, and he says that while this was not the standard Bengali, of high literary writings, it was nevertheless employed occasionally to embellish and render lifelike certain themes and ideas. So if you had within a novel, if you had somebody with the Muslim Bengali identity, that person would be made to speak the Islamic Bengali language. It was representative of an administrative and legal as well as a living colloquial vocabulary. Linguistically, however, as I've said, there doesn't seem to be a clear distinction between the Dobhashi Bangla and the Musalmani Bengali. And some of this I think you are already familiar with. The next slide that I turn to. And this is part of, this language has been part of local literature in Bengal, in the Bengal region for a very, very long time. You have legends like Malua and Bhelua sung in the ballad style in Moymanshing. You have Syed Hamza's works. You have Muslim poets of the Roshan Chittagong area who are also using these traditions. And in fact, and I'll soon come to this, I show how this is still quite in a fluid state because both kind of linguistic registers are being used. So the poets of the Chittagong area, Roshan Chittagong area, actually end up using Sanskritic Bengali as well, as scholars have shown. And the Pachalis of the time using very mixed syncretic language. So this is quite an open scribal culture and is a part of popular religion as well. And this is why this becomes very important for us, because the next category or the next genre of works I'll be looking into, the Nasihatnamas, actually end up using this language, and this becomes a very important vehicle for the spread of religious messages. So songs based on local legends like those of Chandramukhi, Bhelua and Malua had been extremely popular in the Bengal region since medieval times. Usually tragic tales of love and betrayal, these were sung or performed by groups of itinerant musicians traveling the countryside. The ballads implicitly underlined the far more vibrant and naturally syncretic nature of the Bengali language as witnessed in these songs. There are in fact many instances of poets being at ease with both styles. Even later on, that is, both the Sanskritic style as well as this Dobhashi style that I'm talking about. Syed Hamza, one of the greatest writers of this genre in the 18th century, composed works in standard literary Bengali of his day. Muslim poets from the Roshan Chittagong area that I was talking about earlier maintained a pure Shadhu style in their writing till as late as the beginning of the 20th century, drawing clear distinctions with the Islamic Bengali style in their title pages. Sorry, I thought you had a question. You raised your hand. No, you didn't. Okay. Ordinary scribes and writers too were free-floating. And I've looked at this in my bigger work as well, in my bigger book project. And I show how even as far as the colloquial language is concerned, whereby we're not talking about the Islamic variant, but if you look at medieval ballads from Bengal, this language is very different. It's very early. The folk language is very different from the language that is being promoted by the Pundits around the start of the 19th century. And yet, this is such a rich language, and not to be ignored at all. And most happily for us and for Bottola, this is the language that is promoted by Bottola when its earliest publications are being produced, because they're very canny businessmen. They know this is the language that is going to sell. They're not going to be as stupid as the missionaries were, because for them money matters and for them readership matters. And this is why it's not surprising their print runs are 3,000, 2,000, sometimes 4,000 as compared to the Bhadralok print runs, which are around 500. So if you compare the print runs of the books being published in the highbrow presses and the Bottola presses, you can see the difference. And the earliest publications that come out of the Bottola presses are all, basically a printing of the manuscripts that were circulating for such a long time, the folk legends, the ballads, and so on that people were reading. They continue to shape the same and feed the same literary audience.